Hello, everyone, and welcome to this audio podcast. This audio podcast is part of the Laboratorial news. This audio podcast is part of a Hello LabZtorm. This audio podcast is part of a Crow Brolder, and this audio podcast as part of a Storm Robotics production. This audio podcast, so in following a previous a previous audio podcast in this laboratorial news sort of series or edition. This audio podcast will go into the methodology. We'll go into the sort of methodology aspects of this peer-reviewed and published works from 2020. So the justification for the surveys or the polls and the sample. So previous investigations, investigations have utilized surveys or polls of healthcare service users and those amongst CKD population, chronic kidney disease population, and general layman's or public. And these were investigations or literature and works that inspired the poll implementation through the renal patient support group or the RPSG. And so it had been decided between the research team or the investigators the moderators and admin teams to implement five short polls from around January 2018 to July 2018 through the RPSG's closed social media platform. Ethics committee approval ethics committee approval was investigated. However, was not required for this works. At the time, guidelines of the British Healthcare and Intelligence Association sort of framework or guideline were utilized. And so this were aimed to obtain an initial perspective from the social media platform, the RPSG social media platform, and the time frame for the collection of responses to the polls was limited to 6 months, and therefore a sample size calculation was not carried out. So as in investigations where specific calculations are carried out to identify an appropriate sample size. For example, before implementing the practical or the practical side of works. In this works, a sample size was not carried out. Instead, a target of 1,000 responses was set. And at the time, At the time, it was also important. It was also important to get a representation from various ethnicities using the RPSG or utilizing the RPSG, and the polls were pinned as sort of pinned as announcements at the top of the RPSG social media platform over the planned duration. In the peer-reviewed and published works from 2020, there is an overview that summarizes the polls, questions, and responses. And as part of this, audio, this sort of audio on this podcast, we'll get there will be a look into the overview in as part of this. So polls and development and implementation. So an initial version of the polls was piloted, and amendments were then made to parts of the questions and the phrasing. The updated version of the polls was utilized to gain responses from the RPSG members. Potential respondents were then informed of the reason informed of reasons and around the polls and the anonymity around the polls and the anonymity of responses and ability to withdraw from the polls at any time. The peer-reviewed and published works from 2020 also has a background in regard to the summary or relating to the summary of the respondents. And then the peer-reviewed published works from 2020 at the same time, there are supplementary pages that have information about the RPSG and also information in context of relating to the polls. So respondents were primarily asked. Primarily asked. Number one, would you see a physician? Would you see a physician other than your own? Number two, how can healthcare professionals better understand understand or appreciate being for example in a chronic illness. Number three, if you had access to a healthcare scientist or AHP, allied health professional in primary care or community, who could tell you all about your renal investigations, tests and investigations, would you access this service? And number four was in around tech support and usage. What tech solutions are available through general practice and or through transplant divisions or departments. And question 5 excuse me, question 5 was how likely would you utilize technologies, prospective technologies for educational support from AHP, allied health professionals or scientists. The in part of this works there was a part of this works in regard to the methodology. General Data Protection Regulation 2018 was implemented. So primarily the RPSG is a closed social media platform, and and uh, and this at the same time is sort of an educational information portal platform for healthcare service users in amongst the CKD population. The RPSG is covered or in around the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation 2018. The RPSG is covered under this under primarily primarily under a data and privacy and protection policy aligned and linked to Facebook as being the primary social media platform, the primary social media platform. And the General Data Protection Regulation sort of creates consistent data protection rules across the EU, and the GDPR have been in effect from May 2018, and applicable to organizations based in the EU, as well as organizations and as well as organizations around the world that provide or offer services and process data from or about people in the EU. In keeping with GDPR, the research team or the investigators had not reported any personal identifiable data or PID. So, for example, names, dates, names, dates of birth, addresses, and or locations of participants. So, in around the polls, the different polls. So, for the different polls. Um, Poll one was again looked at. Would you see a physician other than your own? Number two, how can health professionals understand or appreciate being in a chronic illness? Number three, uh, if you had access to a healthcare scientist or a AHP, allied health professionals in primary care or community, who could tell you about your tests and investigations, would you access this service? Question four, technology support and usage. What technology solutions are available through the general practice and or sort of transplant divisions, and in around poll five. Sorry, question five, which looked at uh, again looked at how likely are you to use the following future technologies. And so the future technologies or prospective technologies for educational support from a healthcare professional. So in around this particular poll, for example, there were varying options that respondents could could uh, could select could select from in as part of the works.